question of whether God controls our choices or not is a long-standing and complex theological debate. Many believers in the Judeo-Christian tradition firmly believe that God is all-powerful and sovereign, and that nothing happens without his explicit will and control. The idea of human free will seems to conflict with the notion of an all-powerful God who directs all things. And yet, the Bible presents a complex picture, depicting human beings as making real choices while also affirming God's ultimate sovereignty. This tension has been grappled with by theologians, philosophers, and everyday believers for centuries. There are no easy answers, but examining the biblical text closely can shed some important light on this crucial issue. The overarching testimony of Scripture is that God is indeed in control, but that he has chosen to give humans a genuine measure of free will and moral responsibility. The divine sovereignty and human free will are both real and true, even if we can't fully reconcile them. One of the key passages on this topic is the account of Joseph in the book of Genesis. Joseph's brothers cruelly sell him into slavery, an act that sets off a long series of events. Yet Joseph later tells his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." Genesis 50 verse 20. Here we see human choice and divine sovereignty operating in tandem. The brothers made a wicked choice, yet God was able to use that choice to accomplish his greater purposes. This is a common biblical theme. God works through, and even within, the sinful choices of human beings. The cross of Christ is the ultimate example, where the unjust execution of the sinless Son of God was simultaneously the greatest act of human evil and the centerpiece of God's plan of salvation. As the Apostle Peter declares, Jesus was handed over to you by God's deliberate plan and foreknowledge, and you, with the help of wicked men, put him to death by nailing him to the cross. Acts 2 verse 23. So the Bible affirms both God's sovereignty and human responsibility. He is in ultimate control, working out his eternal purposes, yet he allows real human agency and choice. The story of the Exodus provides another powerful illustration. Pharaoh stubbornly refuses to let the Israelites go, hardening his heart against God's commands. Yet the biblical text also says that the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, Exodus 9 verse 12. Pharaoh's choice was real, but God was also sovereignly at work, using Pharaoh's rebellion to accomplish his plan of delivering Israel from slavery. This raises difficult questions. If God is truly sovereign, how can human choices be meaningful and morally significant? Isn't it just an illusion of free will? And if we do have genuine free will, how can God be truly sovereign and in control? Theologians have grappled with these knotty problems for centuries. One important consideration is the distinction between God's sovereign will and his permissive will. The idea is that there are some things that happen because God actively decrees them, and other things that he permits to happen, even if he doesn't will them directly. In the case of Pharaoh, for example, God may not have directly caused Pharaoh's heart to harden, but he sovereignly used Pharaoh's own rebellious choice for his greater purposes. Another key principle is that of divine concurrence, the belief that God's sovereignty and human free will work together in a mysterious way. When we make a choice, it is a genuinely free choice, but God is also mysteriously at work, governing and directing that choice to fulfill his eternal plan. As the Puritan theologian Jonathan Edwards put it, God's sovereignty and man's responsibility are both true. This all gets at the heart of the classic debate between Calvinism and Arminianism, two major theological streams within Protestant Christianity. Calvinists tend to emphasize God's absolute sovereignty and the concept of predestination, the idea that God has foreordained all things, including who will be saved. Arminians, on the other hand, place more emphasis on human free will and the role of human choice in salvation. While these two views differ in important ways, both ultimately affirm the tension and mystery at the heart of the divine sovereignty for human free will question. Calvinists believe that God's sovereignty is so absolute that he ordains all things, even the sinful choices of human beings. Arminians believe that God has granted humans genuine free will, and that salvation is contingent on human choice. But both camps recognize the profound mystery involved. As the Calvinist pastor John Piper has written, our minds cannot fully reconcile divine sovereignty and human responsibility. But the Bible teaches both, and we must hold fast to both, even if we cannot understand exactly how they fit together. This mystery is echoed throughout the Bible. In the book of Proverbs, we read that the plans of the heart belong to man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord, Proverbs 16 verse 1. In other words, the initial impulse and choice is ours, but the ultimate outcome is in God's hands. The Apostle Paul writes that God works all things according to the counsel of his will, Ephesians 1 verse 11, yet he also exhorts his readers to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, Philippians 2 verse 12. Ultimately, the biblical witness points to a God who is absolutely sovereign, yet has chosen to give humans a meaningful measure of free will. He is able to work through and even within our sinful choices to accomplish his eternal purposes. As the prophet Isaiah declares, "My counsel shall stand, and I will accomplish all my purpose," Isaiah 46 verse 10. This truth has profound implications for how we view our lives and choices. If God is truly sovereign, it means that nothing happens by chance or accident. Even the most painful and senseless events are under his control and are part of his greater plan. The story of Joseph is a powerful example. The horrific betrayal and suffering he endured ultimately led to the preservation of God's people. At the same time, the fact that we have genuine free will means that our choices matter deeply. We are not mere puppets, but moral agents responsible for our actions. The abundant warnings, commands, and exhortations in Scripture demonstrate that God holds us accountable for how we live. As the author of Hebrews writes, it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God, Hebrews 10 verse 31. This tension between sovereignty and free will plays out in many practical areas of the Christian life. The doctrine of divine election, for instance, raises challenging questions. If God has predetermined who will be saved, how can evangelism and human choice be meaningful? Calvinists believe that God uses human means like preaching the gospel to effectually call the elect to salvation. Arminians argue that God has granted humans the freedom to respond in faith, and that evangelism is crucial because salvation depends on human choice. Similar tensions arise around the issue of prayer. If God is sovereign, why pray? Doesn't that imply we can change God's mind? But the Bible commands us to pray, and presents prayer as a means by which God accomplishes his will. The mystery is that God has chosen to work through the prayers of his people, even though he is all-powerful and all-knowing. The biblical doctrines of providence and concurrence also speak to this tension. Providence refers to God's sovereign direction and governance of all things. Concurrence is the idea that God's sovereign will and human free will work together in a way that we can't fully comprehend. So when we make a choice, it is truly our own, yet God is mysteriously at work, using that choice to fulfill his eternal purposes. This truth should fill us with both humility and hope. Humility, because it reminds us that we are not in ultimate control, God is. And hope, because it assures us that nothing happens outside of God's sovereign plan. Even the most difficult and painful circumstances are under his sovereign sway, and are part of his good and perfect will. The story of Esther provides a powerful illustration. Esther finds herself in a position to save the Jewish people from annihilation, but is afraid to approach the king. Her uncle Mordecai exhorts her, saying, "Who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Esther 4 verse 14. Esther ultimately finds the courage to act, and God uses her choice to deliver his people. Yet the text also states that the king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord, he turns it wherever he will, Proverbs 21 verse 1. So Esther's choice was real and meaningful, but God was also sovereignly orchestrating events behind the scenes. The same is true in our lives. Our choices matter, but they are part of God's greater plan. This truth should also shape how we view suffering and evil. If God is truly sovereign, it means that he permits or even ordains certain things for his own good purposes, even if we can't always see or understand them. The book of Job powerfully grapples with this mystery. Job suffers horrific tragedy, yet maintains his faith in God's ultimate goodness and control. At the end of the book, God does not provide a comprehensive explanation for Job's suffering. Instead, he reminds Job of his own infinite power and wisdom, declaring, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth?" Job 38 verse 4. The implication is that God's ways are far above our own, and that we must trust in his sovereign plan, even when we can't fully comprehend it. This is a humbling truth, but also a liberating one. It means that we don't have to have all the answers or understand everything that happens. We can rest in the knowledge that God is in control, and that he is working all things together for his good purposes. As the Apostle Paul writes, "And we know that for those who love God all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose." Romans 8 verse 28. Of course, this doesn't mean that suffering is easy or painless. The Bible is full of lament, as God's people cry out to him in the midst of their anguish. But it does mean that we can face even the most difficult circumstances with hope, trusting that God is sovereignly at work, even if we can't see it. This truth also has profound implications for how we view salvation and the Christian life. If God is truly sovereign, then salvation must ultimately be his work, not ours. As the Apostle Paul writes, "For by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast." Ephesians 2 verses 8 to 9. At the same time, the Bible is clear that we have a vital role to play. We are called to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, Philippians 2 verse 12, and to make every effort to supplement your faith with virtue, 2 Peter 1 verse 5. Our choices and actions matter, even as we recognize that God is the one ultimately at work in us. This tension is captured beautifully in the story of the prodigal son. The younger son makes the choice to rebel and squander his inheritance. Yet when he returns home, his father runs to embrace him, restoring him fully. The son's choice was real, but the father's compassion and forgiveness were also real, a powerful picture of God's sovereign grace. Ultimately, the biblical witness points to a God who is both sovereign and personal, both all-powerful and intimately involved in the lives of his creatures. He is the one who works all things according to the counsel of his will, Ephesians 1 verse 11, yet also the one who so loved the world, that he gave his only Son, John 3 verse 16. This truth should shape how we approach our lives and choices. We can make real decisions, secure in the knowledge that God is sovereign. We can face suffering and evil with hope, trusting that God is at work even when we can't see it. And we can pursue salvation and the Christian life with both humility and confidence, knowing that it is ultimately God's work in us. As the Apostle Paul declares, "Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God! How unsearchable are his judgments and how inscrutable his ways!" Romans 11 verse 33. The tension between divine sovereignty and human free will may never be fully resolved on this side of eternity. But we can rest in the assurance that our God is infinitely wise, good, and in control, and that he invites us to play a meaningful role in his eternal plan.